Bullshit.
Pretend for a moment we've entered a parallel universe, free of bullshit and full of bold solutions. That's what the No BS show's all about. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich. Our guest today is Jeff Weinberg. But first, let's cut the bullshit. Today, I'm going to build upon Alanis Morissette's late 1990s hit, Ironic. In the song, she talks about supposed ironies like a free ride when you're already paid, followed by her saying, "Isn't that ironic, don't you think?" And you can guess how I'll change the wording. Supposedly undecided voters are interviewed and go on to explain in detail what they don't like about one of the candidates. Isn't it BS, don't you think? People complain they want more structure and specifics about what they're to work on. Then they complain that their work's boring and that they don't have freedom to make decisions. Isn't it BS, don't you think? Some managers say they want to empower their employees, then micromanage their key activities. Isn't it BS, don't you think? Meetings are held, emails are sent, details are discussed. Yet people say they weren't told or that they didn't know what was expected. Isn't it BS, don't you think? People want the title, the money, the perks, but they don't want to change and grow to meet expectations. Isn't it BS, don't you think? Let's look in the mirror more. Let's listen more. Let's commit to change. Let's achieve personal and professional growth. Let's cut the BS. The No BS show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/NoBS. Try a book like The Girl with the Lower Back Tattoo by Amy Schumer. You can download it for free today. Go to audibletrial.com/NoBS for your free audiobook. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Our guest today is Jeff Weinberg, president of Senior Assistants. Jeff is a highly accomplished healthcare executive who is a healthcare advocate, corporate elder care consultant, caregiver advocate, and public speaker. Jeff's currently president of Senior Assistants, a full-service home care senior assistance company providing non-medical services, including shopping, cooking, light cleaning, medication reminder, to name just a few. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start off by having you walk us through your educational background and your career journey.
Well, I started my career journey at Kent State University, and I got a bachelor's degree in psychology. I then started to work for the welfare department, and at that time went back to school and got my master's degree in counseling at Duquesne University, at which point I worked as a therapist, a clinical therapist in a MHMR outpatient center, and I became the director of outpatient mental health. I worked in that arena for about 12 to 15 years. At the time, there was a lot of funding coming from the federal government, and then the funding got cut. And we were working in a mental health center that basically had over 200 employees, and we were cut down to 10. And the 10 were people that were all director levels, and we formed a counseling center. And on top of that, I had a 10% pay cut, and I had, my wife was pregnant with our first child. So I was trying to find out, well, what else can I get into? And I had a person who, we were on the board of directors of a place called Senior Program in Homestead, and his name was Ian Rawson. Ian is actually a Mellon, and he also was on the faculty of Graduate School of Public Health. And so I spoke with him, and Ian said that the growing field, just like mental health was, it was going to be the whole arena of services for the aging population. So I went back to school and I got a master's degree in public health administration with an emphasis on aging. From there, I got a license as a nursing home administrator, and I became a nursing home administrator in Pennsylvania as well as in Florida. And I got it in Florida as well because my family and my wife's family moved back to Florida. I have had, from that position, from being a licensed nursing home administrator, I have evolved and worked in various capacities from hospitals and or nursing homes. I've planned and developed and implemented almost every aspect of services, from nursing home to dementia care to inpatient rehab units to geriatric assessment units, and senior services in the community. So I have a very extensive background in administration and in planning and developing. And most recently, as you mentioned, I developed my own business, and it used to be called Senior Assistance. It now is called Caregiver Champion. And the reason why it's called Caregiver Champion is that also has evolved. My initial plan was to work with seniors, and what I found out was going on was that, in essence, I was working more with the family caregiver. And so we're looking at a population of 45 to 65. And yes, I did do some things with seniors, and I still do, but primarily I'm working with the caregiver. And there's quite a plight that they go through with what they have to experience.
A lot to go over and get into with the specifics of the current company. I want to go back in time to the undergrad at Kent State. What made you choose Kent State?
I chose Kent State because I actually had looked at Penn State and Kent State. And Penn State seemed to be very overwhelming for me. It's a very large university. Kent State, I had a cousin that was going there, and my uncle, as it turned out, said, let me take you up to Kent State and have you take a look at it. And the campus is gorgeous, and it was a much smaller university, and so that's where I went.
After Kent State, you have the one position where you're moving along, get to a director level position, and then some major change happens. Talk about that and how you dealt with it, what you learned from it that might help our audience.
The change from going from mental health to another career growth, is that what you're asking me?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I was devastated. We were doing some really wonderful things in mental health, and we were serving a population that really needed the care. And when we lost our funding, a lot of mental health centers lost their funding. And as a result of that, today even, there are people who have mental health problems that are not getting the care that they need. The other piece is that essentially I was in a position where I had no more growth. And I had to find a way to professionally grow, but at the same time, find something that met my needs in terms of helping a certain population.
And you chose then, around that time, you chose to get the master's at Duquesne? Because you have two masters,
well, the first master was at Duquesne. The second master was in public health, and that was at Pitt.
Okay.
the Graduate School of Public Health.
So you've got three universities to be an alumnus with: Kent State, Duquesne, and Pitt, and the two different master's level. Talk about going back and getting those degrees. And so I'm assuming you did at least one of those while working full-time, or were they both done in the evenings while working full-time?
Both of them were done working full-time. And obviously, that's not an easy thing to do, and you have a family. But I couldn't afford to take off work and just go to school. But when you're motivated and you know that this is important to you and to your family and to your career, it becomes something that's not necessarily a burden. It actually becomes something that you really want to do. Actually, I did much better working full-time, having a family, and getting my master's degrees than I did when I went to college. And I did okay, but I also partied much more at that time. And so the motivation was much different.
So then you talk about, other than family members, who were some mentors and how they impacted you?
I really feel fortunate in my career. I had two people, especially. I've had some other ones, but not as strong as these two. I was director of geriatric services for South Hills Health System, which is now Jefferson Hospital. And I reported to the senior vice president, and she was a nun. Her name was Sister Crescentia. And Sister Crescentia was commanded respect. And not because she was a nun, but it was because how she treated her people that reported to her. And if she called you at 3:00 in the morning and told you to meet her at the Liberty Tunnels, you'd be there. And the next day, she would walk up to you and when you were eating lunch or whatever, and she would say, that Jeffrey, he met me at the Liberty Tunnels at 3:00 in the morning. Isn't he a fantastic person? The other thing that she taught me was that details are important. And so, for example, if we planned a volunteer luncheon, she would say, "What color are the napkins?" And I would go, "I don't know, sister. What difference does it make?" And she would go, "Jeffrey, it makes a lot of difference because that's going to make your luncheon either really good or just mediocre." And so she taught me about that. And then the last thing she taught me was that she helped me gain confidence in my own abilities. We were doing a major presentation to the foundation board. I was chairing the committee for senior services, and they were going to fund it. And I came in, and so she wanted to practice it ahead of time. And I came in and with my note cards and started reading off my note cards, and she screamed at me, "Throw those note cards away. You don't need note cards. You know this better than anybody." So I threw the note cards away. But what that did was it helped me to gain confidence in the things that were important to me. The other that were good, that I thought were good about me, and I could then feel better about. The other person was also in the same system, and his name was George Yeckel, and he was president of the South Hills Health System. And what he taught me was that as a leader, you can care about your employees. And he was a very caring person. And yet he led, and he was very successful.
The No BS Marketing Podcast with Dave Mastovich is brought to you by Mass Solutions. Put our 3-step No BS process to work for you. Visit masssolutions.biz today to take your marketing to another level. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.
We're listening with our guest today, Jeff Weinberg, a highly accomplished healthcare executive, healthcare advocate, corporate elder care consultant, caregiver advocate, public speaker. Jeff, you just walked through your mentors. You were going through your career path. Tell me about a learning experience when maybe you were a BS employee, a tough boss, or your communication wasn't what it needed to be. Looking back, when do you think you might have been guilty of some BS? What did you learn, and how might it help our audience?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is I don't know if this is BS, but this is what happened. This was the experience and what I learned. I tend to trust people when I meet them and get to know them, and I give people the benefit of the doubt. And as it turns out, there are people that should be trusted as quickly as I probably do. For example, I was working in a health system and I left someone a phone message, and that phone message ended up getting forwarded to the vice president of the health system. It really upset me. It was embarrassing, and it was something that was like, why did you do that? And there's been several other experiences that I've had that are like that. And so
you were the BSer, and that voice message is something you should have said directly to the vice president?
I should have said directly to the person. I left a voicemail to telling the person what I felt about what was going on, and I shouldn't have had it recorded because that then was held against me.
Yeah.
Well,
that's more that person being the BSer. So I'm going to push back on you. When were you be vulnerable when you had an instance where you just did something? Looking back now, you go, boy, I was wrong. Like, some people can't admit they made a mistake. We have presidential candidates right now that don't seem to be able to admit blatantly obvious mistakes on each side. And I think vulnerability is a big part of leadership. When sports teams, you have a lot of coaches that can't admit that they made a mistake. And what I try to get our guests to do is say, one of the things that happened to me earlier in my career was I wasn't patient enough, and here's an example of it. I was short with people, and I got a bad reputation as someone who was short with people, and I look back and I didn't handle it well, and what I learned from it is I need to do certain things each day to give me flexibility, to refresh, whatever, just something of that nature, that you were vulnerable and admitted that this is something I could have done better.
Well, it's something that is an ongoing issue for me, and I try to work on doing it better. But the vulnerability is that I can be very sarcastic. And when I'm sarcastic, it's very cutting to the person at hand. Mm-hmm. And because it's kind of like you've hurt me, so I'm going to get you back. Mm-hmm. And I've had my children tell me that. I've had my wife tell me that. I've had friends tell me that. I've had people at work tell me that. And, after a number of people have hit you over the head with it, you tried to refrain from doing it. But I have to tell you, it's still something that every once in a while creeps up, and I have to, and I do it. But now I at least can think about it before I spit it out.
So you have the self-awareness and you've worked on it.
I have. Mm-hmm. I'm not there yet, though.
We're all work in progress. Great answer. Now let's go back to your career, and the title of the company is Caregiver Champion.
Right.
Okay, so the president of Caregiver Champion. Talk about Caregiver Champion.
Well, as I've indicated, I've been in healthcare most of my career, and largely today, and this is what especially since I developed the program, the caring in healthcare has gone away. And healthcare has become extremely corporate, bottom line, dollar type thing. And it is very overwhelming to the consumer who's trying to figure out what they need for themselves or for their loved one. So I developed Caregiver Champion to be a patient advocate for that person or that family. And the person, what we do initially is help people get through the healthcare bureaucratic maze. Because people that are working or doing things are doing them according to what they need to do to get their job done. But it not necessarily means that they're helping the person at hand. I can give you a number of examples. I have a person still today who the gentleman became a quadriplegic after an automobile accident. He was in a hospital here in Pittsburgh and was moved to their rehab unit. I was contacted because, like, after the first week of him being there, they wanted him to go to a nursing home. And the wife, who was trying to be his advocate, basically, didn't want that to happen. And so I had a meeting with the doctor, the director, the therapist, and things like that. And I basically talked about the fact that they weren't giving them the opportunity to have the ability to improve. And as a result of that, that person stayed in the inpatient rehab unit for over 6 weeks. And he has since gone home and has regained a lot of his functioning and is doing very well.
How does this work? If I want your services, I contact you and I utilize you, do I pay you a fee?
Yes.
Okay. How does that work?
Well, the fee is negotiated based on what it is that we're going to do.
Okay.
Initially, I set up an assessment of what the problems are, and then we come up with a joint plan. And based on that plan is the fees for services that we provide. The insurances do not pay for my service. It's all private pay.
Okay. So give me a ballpark if I need help with a loved one that is, let's say, just a long-term illness, and I'm struggling with it. And let me take a step back. Let's say, how does someone learn about you? And give me an example of a customer that might be listening today that could become a customer. They just don't know it. So how do they learn about you? Then what happens when they contact you, and how do you decide on all the fees and so forth?
Well, first of all, because I've been in the healthcare field for a long time, I have a lot of people who know about me. And there's this adage that one person always represents 10 people. So there's a lot of people who know about me without even having to do much at all. But the other things that I do is I do a lot of networking. I belong to professional groups. I also do speaking engagements, and I teach. I teach at community college and Penn State. So I have a lot of arenas that I'm going in and out of in terms of people that I meet and people that I'm networking with and things like that.
So the patient, though, isn't referred by social services to you or area agency on aging to you. This is directly, they know you from your network and from your marketing, and they reach out to you.
Right. Social service and it probably would not be referring to me because their role would be to get that person out of the hospital as quickly as possible. And so it's all referred by word of mouth and by other people. Now, I also have a contract with the MS Society. And with that contract, they refer to me for people who need advocacy, and they pay for my services. So people who have MS, they don't pay for any of my services.
Is that your biggest number of patient clients, is people with MS?
It's not my biggest, but it's a portion of them. I also just negotiated a contract with a major corporation in Pittsburgh. And that corporation is wanting caregiver services for their employees. Because what's current right now is that employees who are full-time caregivers are representing 20 to 25% of the workforce. Those employees have lots of issues in terms of stress, absenteeism, tardiness, presenteeism, which means you're there but you're not there, leave of absence, and just being general population that's much sicker than their employee. So having a patient advocate work with the employees, both doing lunch and learns as well as individual help for those employees, helps to reduce their stress. And it becomes a win-win kind of thing. It wins for the company because if someone leaves their job and they have to pay to replace that person, and it's usually like 1.5 times the salary. So if somebody's making $50,000 and they leave their job because they can no longer do both, it's probably going to cost the company $75,000 to $100,000 to replace that person. In addition to that, that person who's left their job, the statistics are saying that they would have lost somewhere in the neighborhood of over $300,000.
To our listeners, thanks for joining us for the No BS Marketing Show. Visit masssolutions.biz, click on the podcast button for show notes plus additional marketing and messaging resources. You can also find it on iTunes and Overcast and all the other podcast aggregators. Sign up for light reading. You'll receive valuable strategies every other week to improve your marketing and transform your message. It really is light, intended to be read in 2 minutes or less, and it just might trigger bright ideas for you. Again, to sign up, visit masssolutions.biz, light reading. Ask yourself, what's the big idea, and build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions.